Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm gonna be reacting to a video called How to Sound More Swedish, Swedish Pitch, Accent and More. It had never occurred to me to have a Swedish accent or how to sound more Swedish, but I'm excited to find out what exactly constitutes a Swedish accent, so let's check it out and comment, like and subscribe.
Fun Swedish. The Swedish accent is quite unique because it has a rare pitch accent and a large number of vowels, vokaler. A, O, U, Å, E, I, Y, Ä, Ö. All these things
This already sounds super hard.
combined makes it sound like we're singing when we talk. Today I will go through some things that are good to know if you want to sound like a Swede. Like most countries, there are different dialects, and that's the same here in Sweden, which means that there are different ways to sound Swedish. But since I'm from Stockholm, this video will focus more on the Stockholm accent and what is also known as the East Central way of talking. So, how to sound like a Swede? Number 1, learn the Swedish vowels to perfection. Like we said before, the Swedish vowels are A, O, U, Å, E, I, Y, Ä, Ö. And remember to pronounce the Swedish vowel the Swedish way, because our
Those three A's sound the same to me.
A is nothing like the English A, okay? You can check out this video that we made before if you want to know more details on how to pronounce the Swedish A. But again, if you want to speak like a Swede, then you need to master the Swedish vowels and how they are pronounced by heart. So repeat after me. A. And here it's very important to put down your jaw when you say it. A. It kind of is a little bit like you're seeing a cute puppy and you're saying "aw," something like that. Ah. And when you say this vowel, it's very important that you do the O, a little circle with your lips. Ooh.
It's like ooh.
Ooh is a little bit like you're saying you, kind of, maybe a bit softer, but maybe that will help you. Ooh. Ooh. Here it sounds a bit like you're a bit surprised. Ooh. And this O is our own letter. It's basically an A with an U on the top.
That's so weird.
E. And here you kind of need to show your teeth when you do this. E. E.
Like E.
This is this kind of nasal sound we make. You kind of need to think that you're doing something like this. E. It kind of works a little bit like the English E. Something like that, but more like E. I kind of put my tongue here when I say it. E. Then we have come to the duck face sound. E. When you say E, you kind of need to do a duck face. It's like you're saying E, but you need to put out your lips when you say this vowel. E. Ah. Here it sounds like you're opening your mouth to the doctor. Ah. And this is basically an A with 2 dots or 2 circles on the top.
There's so many A's.
Our last vowel, Here you need to think that you are an unsophisticated Viking screaming for some beers. Öl. Or this cat. So, in order to master the Swedish vowels,
this is very hard.
It's important to know that Ä is not the same thing as A or Å. Those little dots there on the top makes it a completely different letter, sound and vowel.
I can see that.
With Ö is not the same thing as the U. And why it's so important to not mix up these vowels is because if you do, the Swede will know right away that your Swedish is not native.
Yeah,
and what is even worse, it can sometimes also lead up to some confusion. For example, har, här. Har means have or has. It's basically the same in Swedish. Här, on the other hand, means here. To forget these little dots on the top or add these little dots is a very common mistake actually. But it's good to learn this because this is a way that the Swede will know right away that your Swedish is not native. Another example, år, years, I am, are is a way to measure things. So you see, just by changing these little dots on the top, adding 1, adding 2 or none makes them completely different words. A very common mistake to do when you want to present yourself is to say jag är instead of jag är. Hopefully the Swede will be able to understand what you mean.
Of course.
But when you say jag är Daniela, for example, instead of jag är Daniela, then it sounds like you're saying I And then this way of measuring things, Daniela.
Hopefully they'll
It's a
know
little
what
bit
you mean.
weird. This is why it's so important to not be sloppy with the vowels. You need to say ad when it's ad and ar when it's ar.
It's like
More
ar,
examples.
ar,
För, which is a preposition that can mean all these things. For is an old way of saying she, he, or it left. You see, very
Oh my
important
God.
to not mix these up. För, for. As you can see, it's super important to focus on the Swedish vowels and get them right. And this is
I'm
why
seeing this.
we focus a lot on these things in our Swedish courses. We make the students practice this a lot so they get the perfect Swedish pronunciation in the end. Actually, many of our students stress about using n and et right. Even if it's good to know this, it's not as important as getting the vowels right.
Oh my God,
Because
okay.
normally Swedes will be able to understand you even if you mix up n and et. However, if you mix up the vowels, it will for sure lead to some misunderstandings, like we mentioned before. Moving
Okay.
on, number 2. The Swedish
important.
vowels actually have more than one sound. Now, I don't want
What?
to scare you, but things would actually get even more complicated with the Swedish vowels. And you need to
Okay.
get this right as well in order to speak like a Swede. Do you remember that I showed you that Swedish has 9 vowels? Well, you can actually say that there are 18 Swedish vowels. At
is
least
a nightmare.
it sounds like this, because the Swedish vowels have more than one sound, normally
Oh my.
2 sounds. Let's get into that now. You could say that the Swedish vowels have a long and a short sound. Let's explain this by using the vowel a. The first a sound is pronounced just like we say in the Swedish alphabet, a. This is the long version, and you can hear it in words such as glas, bra, ja. But then you can also hear a shorter version, more of a a. For example, in the words glass, papper, vatten.
They
The
do sound
general
different.
rule is that the a sounds long when it's followed by just one consonant.
Okay.
Like in the word glass. Can you see here? Just one consonant, the S, comes after
like
the a. The a
indirect
also has a
birth.
tendency to sound longer if it is in the end of a word. Like for example, bra and ja. But then it becomes
better.
shorter if it's followed by 2 consonants. Like in the examples glass, papper, vatten. This rule with the long and the short vowel sounds happens with all the Swedish vowels. Here are some
Sounds
examples.
easy enough to learn.
Glas, glass. Bok, bock. Hus, buss. År, 8. El, 1. Fika, ficka.
Oh, the fika!
4, 40. Päron, äpple. Öl, östra.
But keep in mind that we always have some exceptions to these rules.
Of course, we
Words
can't forget
that
about that.
don't follow the normal rule.
Hate them.
Normally, the exceptions happen when it's a borrowed word, a word that Swedish took from another language. For example, the word ananas. This should be pronounced like ananas, but it's not because it's a borrowed word, so we just keep it like it is, and it will break the normal Swedish rule.
Okay.
Ananas. I mean, it's an exotic fruit. We don't have this in Sweden. However, even if there are exceptions, I still think strongly that you should learn this general rule because it will help your pronunciation a lot. Then you just need to write down the exceptions and learn them by heart. Number 3, if you want to sound really Swedish and have a singy-songy melody, then you need to nail the Swedish pitch accent.
That
and
sounds
you
hard.
can divide the Swedish pitch accent in 2 different accents. The acute accent, I think it's called like this, and the grave accent. The acute accent is the normal one, and it means that when we say a word, we put the stress in the first syllable. It looks a bit like this. Upp och ner. Like in this word. Saken. Saken. The thing. And for those who doesn't know what a syllable is, then you can say that it's a way of dividing words in small pieces where there's always a vowel in every piece. It also helps to clap in order to find out how many syllables or vowels there is in a word. For example, my name, Daniela, has 4 syllables. Daniela. That will help you to know this.
So
Yeah,
back
they'll
again
teach
to
you
the
that
cute
in school.
accent. Words with this have the stress in the first syllable like we said. Like in these words. Anden, tomten, ordet, kommer. And in general, most words work like this in Swedish. But
Okay,
then
what
we
about the ones
also
who
have
don't?
some words with a grave accent, which is kind of a double peak accent, which means that the word goes up in the beginning, then it goes down, then it
And
goes
then
up
up?
again. Upp,
Okay.
ner, upp. Like you can see in these words. Anden, tomten, pojke,
Oh my god.
katter, rolig. The tricky question is, how
Which
do you
ones?
know when you should
Yeah.
do the first or the second accent? Like most languages, there are more tendencies than actual rules, since there are many exceptions. So
because it's
normally
plural?
you should do the acute accent, the accent that goes up and then down, in words that have only one syllable, basically just one clap, such as katt, fot, hund. You can also find this accent in adjectives ending with isk, for example, magisk. Also in words with two syllables that have a very weird ending, basically
as?
an ending that is not very common in Swedish. Words like humus, this us ending is not very common in Swedish. And also
Okay.
the word godis. Godis is kind of a slang for godsaker, and there are of course more tendencies for this group. But we're
Oh my
gonna
God,
stop
okay.
here. Maybe if I get more than 500 likes, I could do a part 2 and dig deeper into this. And then finally, you can hear the grave accent, the accent that goes up, down, up, in words with two syllables with typical Swedish ending, such as
And like longer words.
pojke, rolig, and also in compound words, two words put together, such
Longer
as
words.
lastbil, sjukhus, brandman. And
Because
also
it's
in
two
this
words.
group, we have more tendencies and of course some exceptions. But we stop here so we can continue this video and talk more about how you can sound like a Swede. Number 4. Many Swedish words are not pronounced as how they are written. And this is
No.
important to know, especially in spoken Swedish, if you want to sound like a real Swede. For example, the word någonting. This is how we write it. But it's very rare to hear this. We normally just say någonting. Also, the word de is normally pronounced as dom. So most Swedes will say de äter pasta more than de äter pasta. But again, there can be some dialectal differences as well here. Same thing with
I
the
hate
word
that.
dem. Most people would just say dom to this word as well. For
Why?
example, pastan äter människorna. Pastan äter dem. So remember, dom for both de and dem. At least if you want to sound really Swedish. Another example is this word. It's written like this, concert. But the most common way to say it, at least here in Stockholm, is konsert. So as you can see, it's not written the same way as how it is
They take out the
pronounced.
T.
Swedish is perhaps not as crazy as French, which I think don't say most of the words they write, but Swedish is not so far away either. And if you want to know more about how to sound like a real Swede, then you can check out these 2 videos we made about it before. So keep in mind all these things I mentioned today if you want to sound like a real Swede.
Okay. Okay, so this was it's very informative. However, sadly I do not think that I would ever. Well, I'm not like never say never, right? But I think I've seen it. I think it's quite. I don't know, like a pretty hard. I think it's a really hard language, which I already knew before this. I already have it. I don't speak Swedish. I really do not have any idea of like what that language is like. I don't think I could like pick it out. Pick this language, like if people are like talking this like in a lineup, I couldn't figure it out. Like, oh, that's Swedish. So speaking from someone that has no clue of how a Swedish like person talks, this was wow. This looks hard. Again, my understanding is null. So this is like, oh my god, like, what you're coming up with like a lot of information, and I am not like it's not that clear to me. I think one thing is that a lot of the words, well, not all of them, most of them no, but you know, some of them were, oh, it sounds the same as like English. I think it was like cat, probably not cat, but I think it was like hunt, as in like, oh, I get it, it's a hunt, as in like a dash hound. Like I can see like the relationship between like the word and yes, you know, it's a dog, it's a hunt, yes. And I think it was cat. There was another one that actually like made sense to me. Like there were several. I think not the glass one. The glass one as an ice cream, I think it's just because, well, ice cream is like, I kind of like my brain picks it up as like CES, that S sound, and then it's like glass or something. It wasn't glass, but, or maybe it wasn't, I do not know. But I think it was something similar to like glass or glues. So I think it's like, oh, that maybe like doesn't sound that dissimilar. But I think it's just like, again, it's like little, if like the letters are sort of like remotely similar, I'm like, oh, it's not that different from English. But I'm like, I know that I'm like, it's not, this is not a good like thesis, because I'm like pretty awful and pretty like, that's not right. But like a few words, I think, oh, they're maybe like not that difficult. And I think that them as well, they, I think it was them, the one that it obviously is spelled differently and pronounced differently as well, apparently. But I was like, oh, they, as in like they, but it's just like they're spelling like not the TH, but the spelling is sort of like just with a D. But I mean, it kind of like, again, they're not pronounced the same. But they're like, oh, I can see it, like the sound is similar. I do have to say that I think even like learning Swedish, obviously if you're a Swedish native speaker, it's not gonna be like a hard for you, because obviously you've known this your whole life. But I think like and probably other Scandinavian countries, I think don't find this, and they probably do not find this as hard. But I think if you're coming from literally anywhere else in the world that's not Scandinavia, I think it's gonna be like a really hard language to understand. And I think obviously like your mileage may vary. Like I think it just depends on like, you know, some people find like different language and a particular set of languages a little bit harder than others. It's gonna depend on what you know and just your brain, and I don't know who's teaching you. I don't know, like it just depends on like so many factors. But I think in general, I do think that like Swedish, I think it looks to be like, at least from my like this little video, it looks like a hard language to understand, which I'm like, yeah, it's not surprising to me, because it's like, well, it is Scandinavia. I always thought like, again, it's like they sound like gibberish to me, but it's because again, I'm not used to it. So I'm like, I cannot pick out like any single word. I do not know how it sounds. I don't know anything. So I like before this, I would have said, I think it's a hard language. And now I'm like, oh yeah, it is. Like I wasn't wrong. It looks really hard. Just because I think just the vowels that apparently are like most important part about like this pronunciation, how to pronounce things correctly, it looks so hard. They have like so many vowels, like it's like 18 sounds, and like there's 12. Like, well, yeah, to begin with you have like 9, but then you have like 12 or 18, and they're all sort of like very similar. I know that they're like, she explained it, and I'm like, oh yeah, I can see the difference. But you know, I'm seeing the difference because I'm like seeing the video. And you have like a teacher like explaining to you this, and it's like, oh, the ah sound and the a sound and whatever, like little nuances. But I think like once, like if I had to do a test, well, you have to study. But I think like this, I'm like, oh my god, this is so incredibly hard. It's like they have like 3 A's that are all pronounced different depending on the little thing. And I think like the I, they don't even have an I think it's like E. I don't know, like there's like so many of them that they're sort of like repeat each other, and the ooh, it sounds, they don't have an U, they have like an ooh, but that also I think sounds, there's an A or an E that also sounds similar. I think they're all like extremely similar sounding, but like if you see it like right, like if you're listening to them like right next after the other, is like, oh yeah, I can see they do not sound different, but it's because you're sort of like isolating them. I'm wondering if like when people are speaking like Swedish, like, well, of course, if you do not know anything, it's gonna sound the same to you. But once I think like once you have like a little grasp on the language and you know a little bit more, not super fluent, but you know a little bit more, I'm wondering if you can also like pick them up, like, oh yeah, I can see that that's like the A with the little thing on top, or that's the E with the little like whatever. Like they just sound similar. They don't really sound that similar once you can, like your ear gets used to, which I think like it's a part of like learning like any other language. Like probably early on, I think it sounds like like I don't know what you're saying. It just sounds, again, I have no idea. But I think probably like once you get the grasp of it, and then you're like, no, I'm starting to like pick things out, because I think, again, it's like I'm wondering. I think it's just the same as an accent, right? Like an accent. You're probably like the first time you hear an accent or someone speaking from a particular place, maybe you can be a little bit like, whoa, I do not understand a thing. But it's like, no, you actually do understand it. It's just like your brain, you're sort of like your ears need to catch up with your brain, because it's just a matter of like getting used to, you getting, like your ear needs to get used to, well, your ear and your brain, they need to like make that connection. So I think it does take some time, and obviously, why would this would be any different? However, I do have to say that, some languages I think seem to be a little bit harder than others. This looks very hard, but I do think, like, obviously she made a lot of emphasis on how to speak this correctly, which obviously, yes, and how to have like a perfect accent, how to have like a perfect Swedish accent. And, for people, from Swedish people to be like, oh, wow, like you could have told me that you were from Stockholm and I would have believed you, which I think probably it's going to be like the goal for a lot of like, a lot of people probably. However, I will say that do not let this like discourage you, because sometimes I think if you feel like, I think that tends to be the case with people like that are learning a different language. They feel like if I don't speak this perfectly, and if I don't have like the perfect accent, like people are not going to be like either understanding, they're not going to understand me, or they're going to be like, oh, what do you have an accent? It's like, well, first of all, everyone has an accent. Like it depends on like so many different factors of like, where did you learn this, where your family is, and I know how you talk, whatever. Like there's like so many, and how you grew up, and yeah, again, how you absorb the language. Like there's just like so many different like little things that come into place when it comes to like different accents. Then that it's a matter of like everyone's gonna have like a different accent. Everyone's gonna pronounce things differently. But I think generally, I think a lot of people do not really care about like accents in general. At least maybe, I don't know if Swedish people are different in that regard, but I would think just the fact that you're sort of like learning, that you learned, because obviously if you're already like, if you're concerned about like, oh, I'm concerned about the accent, it's like, okay, I have to know that you already know the language, because I'm not going to be concerned about an accent if I have no idea what you're saying. So I think a lot of people are sort of like let that sort of like be a hindrance and be like, oh, I don't speak perfectly, so I'm a little bit like scared. I'm a little bit nervous of like speaking out loud, because I think like people are gonna make fun of me, or people are gonna be like, I'm sorry, what? I did not understood what you said. So I think there's a little bit of that, but I think as long as you actually like can speak like normally, whatever that language is, and normally as in like I can understand you perfectly, and yes, of course you're gonna have an accent that's probably different from mine, but I understand. So then that's what matters at the end of the day, is understanding each other. It doesn't matter if you have like a different accent, if you pronounce things a little bit different, because as long as we're understanding each other, which is the whole point, then who cares? So I think that tends to be the case with a lot of people, that just like, and you put in the effort, right? Like you already learned, which is like a great step forward, and who cares if you have a different accent, or you don't sound like native, because it's like, well, it's to be expected. Maybe you've only been living there for, I don't know, 2 years. I haven't been living there for that long, or I don't know. Maybe you don't even live in Sweden. I don't know. You're just like learning because you want to learn. So I think it's a little bit of that. I think it's coming like me from like, it comes from yourself. Like, oh, I don't really want to speak out loud because it's like, oh, people are going to make fun of me. It's like, no, I think usually people do not care about your accent as long as you're understanding, like if you're speaking as sort of like as basic or as normal as can be, and we can understand each other just fine, because again, everyone's going to have an accent. Even though I think a lot of people tend to say like, oh, I do not have an accent. It's like, well, you do have an accent, because even native people have accents, only that you're not really looking at this from that perspective, because of course it's a language that you speak every day. So you're going to be like, oh, but I do not have an accent. It's like, no, of course you're not thinking this, but obviously ask, I don't know, if you're from the South, like ask someone from the North and ask them if you have an accent. They're going to be like, yes, of course you have an accent. But it's like, no, from my perspective, you guys are the one with an accent. But obviously that happens like everywhere. I think probably everywhere in the world, of like, yes, everyone speaks different. Every single country is going to have like different dialects, different ways of speaking, different ways of pronouncing things. So at the end of the day, like everyone has an accent. It's not just as sort of like you can have a general sort of like understanding and a general type of accent, which is like, well, close to it. Yes, let's say I have let's say someone or some has like as close as a general accent, but again, it's like I think it just depends on who you're asking, because it just depends. But I think a lot of people tend to be really funny about this, and they're like, oh no, I don't have an accent. It's like, no, you absolutely do. It's just that you have an accent of like your hometown, and that's why you're not realizing that you speak different from other countries, other counties, or any other like state or region in whatever country that is. But I do think this is very interesting, and I really do have to end up by saying that the whole thing about, the words that are pronounced different than how they are written, I hate that. It's like, why are you like, obviously there's, I think, well, I'm trying to think of like, there's like some of them probably, yes, I think, I don't know, maybe English has some, but I don't know, like the whole point of like, why are you like writing something that's not pronounced as it is written? I really hate that, because it's like, yes, well, if it's like, why isn't it pronounced that way? Like, you're gonna make me sound like, again, with the whole thing about like, I'm nervous of like speaking out loud. Yes, well, that's what this, it happens because of stuff like this. If you see like a concert, I think that was one of the easier ones. It wasn't pronounced concert again, not concert, concert. I have no idea how that word's pronounced in how it's pronounced, how it's actually said in Swedish, but it wasn't like that. It wasn't like concert or concert. I don't know, whatever it is, it was that like they end up like taking out a few like letters, so it is like it's not even remotely the same. So it's like, well, why don't you guys like change it? Wouldn't it be easier? It would make things easier if you're learning this language, because it's like, oh, you're telling me this word is not pronounced like this. That seems like so hard, because again, how are you supposed to know which ones are pronounced like this and which ones are not? I think it comes with the territory of like, yeah, well, it was bound to happen, and that's why you're learning something. And after a while, of course, you kind of like, oh yeah, I already sort of like internalized this, and then I already know that it's not pronounced like that. But it's just like in general, or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe if you're like learning, as in like you're more like an audible sort of like learner, then it's like, oh, I'm writing it down, and people are gonna be like, no, I'm sorry, this is not spelled correctly. Like, so it is like, no, then why is it written like that? I hate those kind of words, because again, it's like, I think everyone should, it would make life easier for everyone involved in every other language, Swedish, English, I don't know, French, whatever, German, whatever language. Like, if it's just sort of like written how it's pronounced, it should be like, it would make things easier for like everyone. So, but I know it's, in a perfect place, that's in a perfect world, that's how it should be. But I know, sadly, it's really not the case. But that was it for today, and I'll see you next time. Bye.